For the debate, Laura. Thanks very much indeed, Jessica. Now it's France and Germany to the rescue, or is it? The leaders of the nations that form the backbone of the battered Eurozone met in Paris today. Chancellor Angela Merkel and President Nicolas Sarkozy announcing a raft of proposals that they say will restore stability, growth and confidence in the Eurozone. They say it's time for a real economic leadership and authority.
The first of these proposals consists of setting up in the Eurozone a real economic government of the Eurozone. This economic government will be made up of the Council of Heads of Government and Heads of State. It will meet twice a year and more often if necessary, and it will elect a president who will remain in the job for 2.5 years.
Well, how then did those proposals go down with financial and economic experts? Let's find out. My guests tonight are Ali Fatimi. He's a professor of finance at the American Graduate School of Economics in Paris. On the phone from London, Ambrose Evans-Pritchard is the international business editor for The Telegraph. Also on the phone from London is Thomas Clough. He's the Paris bureau chief for the European Council on Foreign Relations. Well, I'll start with you, Ali. What we heard earlier this afternoon were long-term political solutions, but no more cash on the table. How do you think markets are going to react to that?
I don't think market is going to buy into it. These are promises, and what they said really is nothing new. All of this was foreseen in the Lisbon Treaty, which finally was not put into action. I think market expected today either a substantial increase in the European Stability Fund, a Eurozone bond, which is different from Eurobond, by the way. And when they talk about political solution, I don't think head of states meeting twice a year and talking is what market is waiting for. Most probably what they were waiting for was to move toward one budget for the European Union and fiscal safeguards that countries could not spend beyond their means. And I didn't hear that.
All right, let's get the view from London. Ambrose Pritchard-Evans, we'll talk about the policies one by one in more detail in a moment, but just your initial impressions, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you can see the Dow Jones in New York is already tanking. The credit markets hate it. It hasn't solved really any problems. There are no Eurobonds. There's no increase in the size of the rescue fund, the EFSF, and no even hints that it might be increased later. All these other proposals are basically eyewash. I mean, they're perfectly worthy in themselves, but they don't deal with the immediate problem, which is, people are very worried about the health and survival of monetary union. And, the fact that the German-Dutch economies are basically almost completely stopped growing following news that France had zero growth in the second quarter is just making this a lot worse.
Thomas Clough in Brussels, markets on Wall Street already on the decline following those proposals. It seems like they just don't go far enough.
They don't go far enough, and there is a danger now that public opinion thinks that by deciding that Eurozone leaders will meet twice yearly or more if necessary, the Eurozone will get efficient economic government. I think that's an illusion. We've seen in the past that these meetings of leaders are important in crisis situations, but are hopeless in terms of managing the common interest of the Eurozone over a prolonged period of time, especially in normal times. So useful steps in themselves up to a point, but they fall far short of what is needed.
Ali Fatimi, when Sarkozy opened his address, he went straight in on the attack. He said, one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to stop this rampant speculation on the markets. This, of course, following one of the most volatile weeks on stock markets in history. What did you think of that statement?
Well, the markets don't react to words. They react to action. And just making a speech and demanding it is not going to work. I think they continue to shoot the messenger, like no short sale. They are not really coming up. We don't know. Maybe when they write their memoirs, we find out what really held them back from coming up with some concrete measures today. They had the whole week. This meeting had been talked about for a week now, and this was just not, I think, what markets expected.
All right, so I'm going to have to come to the defence of European leaders saying that consensus is developing here. Back to London then. Have investors not been calling for more decisiveness? And is that not what Merkel and Sarkozy are trying to do by implementing what they call real economic governance in the Eurozone? They want this committee that'll be headed up by Herman Van Rompuy. Is that not at least on the right track to what investors want?
Well, Herman Van Rompuy is already the European president, so what difference does that make? We've already had these proposals for European economic governance time and time again. I mean, it's essentially just retreads. It's the same old stuff. It doesn't address any of the issues, which is how is the north of the Eurozone going to backstop the south? You know, are they going to really throw themselves behind this in full fiscal union and make it work, or are they not? And, you know, we've reached the moment when this has to be decided.
What about the move to standardise corporation tax between France and Germany? Will that have any effect on anything at all?
Well, they would have to get these tax proposals through the whole EU. There are quite a lot of countries that are pretty adamantly against this, so I can see tricky problems just in the European Council. But in terms of dealing with the problem at hand, which is, we've got the risk of a global double-dip recession. Everybody's very worried about this. They're very worried about the EU policies in general, which are on two fronts. A, that we've got fiscal overkill. They're forcing the countries of the South to tighten budgetary policy too fast. And we haven't had a sufficient response from the European Central Bank, which has been raising rates into this crisis when it should have been cutting rates and engaging in quantitative easing. And until those two things are dealt with, the markets are going to be terrified.
Thomas Clough, what about the decision to be stricter about the golden rule? That is, making sure that countries keep to the debt level of 60% of GDP.
Well, that's potentially a useful step, introducing a constitutional provision in Eurozone member states' constitutions, forcing them to take the debt problem seriously. But on the other hand, these are provisions that sometimes are broken or will be broken, some countries perhaps more than others. They're not terribly flexible, and there's a problem that extraordinary circumstances might require their suspension, as it were. And then how do you deal with that, and how do you achieve consensus within the Eurozone? The good news out of the meeting today, to say something positive, is that both leaders reaffirmed their joint commitment to keeping the Eurozone show on the road, and in itself steps towards greater harmonization of the German-French tax code, stronger cooperation are all good things. But again, in view of the magnitude of the problem we're facing, and indeed the whole question of how to stop the Eurozone from breaking apart, how to address the North-South problem, what was decided today was wholly insufficient. There is a reason for that, though, I think, and it's very important to note that Angela Merkel said that Eurobonds are not the answer today. She's opened a door there to the future. A very interesting debate has started in Berlin within her own parliamentary party, the CDU, where a growing number of members of the Bundestag, of the German parliament, are now informally discussing under which conditions Germany could accept Eurobonds. The trouble is that this new openness within parts of Angela Merkel's own party, the CDU, has hardened the opposition with her two coalition partners, the Liberals on the one hand and the regional Bavarian CSU on the other. So what we see are deepening lines of fracture within the German government. And that's one reason why Angela Merkel was very keen not to take a decision today, and why the French, who understand her situation, have not pressed her. But it was important to note that she said Eurobonds, not the answer today, which is an important pointer potentially to the future.
Right, and that was something that was echoed by Sarkozy as well, who said right after he didn't close the door on it. He said nothing was being ruled out. But it seems, Ali Fatimi, that investors are saying two things, and they've been saying it for a long time now. They've been saying, one, we need Eurobonds. Two, the European Stability Fund needs to be a whole lot bigger. And it seems to be the case that political leaders are sticking their fingers in their ears and saying, no, sorry, we're not listening.
Well, if you look back over the past 6 months, what has been symptomatic of all these negotiations, all these decisions, is they're always one step behind. In other words, instead of foreseeing the events and standing firm and stopping the erosion, they're always behind. Now, most probably, if there is a severe reaction of the market, if the existence of euro is in danger, then they will come up and say what they should have done today. That yes, Germany and France are ready to back all the loans of all the countries. Simple saying it may not make it necessary. This is what the nature of the market is.
It's the psychology of it.
It's the psychology, exactly. And I think they still cannot get themselves to the point of getting ahead of the flood. They always are trying to do things, the time of which has passed. If you look at this entire 6 months, you can see this step by step. They have always been behind the events. And that's what I call lack of political leadership.
In London, Ambrose, is that something you agree with?
Well, I mean, yes, I do, totally. But it's a huge political and constitutional step to create a fiscal union. I mean, you need new treaties, you need changes to the constitutions of the member states. You're effectively emasculating the historic states of Europe by doing this. I mean, once you sort of blend together budget powers and you create a de facto EU treasury, an EU debt union and pension system, which is what would happen. You're creating a United States of Europe in the full sense, replica of the United States of America. This is a huge leap, and you can't expect these leaders to sort of agree these things at summits. It requires a national consensus behind it, and it doesn't exist hardly in any country in Europe.
Yeah, but they should have thought of that at the time where they signed the Treaty of Maastricht, because you just can't go half-hearted. You know very well that you can't have monetary union without some common fiscal policy. I mean, every economist said that at the time, that this is an impossibility. They said, no, Euro was not an economic decision. The answer was it's a political decision to keep Germany with Western Europe and prevent some disasters like the past history of Europe. So everybody knew from the beginning that this is not going to work. And they had 10 years to move in that direction.
Right, but then one could argue on the same footing that the euro did work quite well for 11, 12 years. I mean, it's only the last 2 years that we've had these kind of problems, isn't it?
Well, they were lucky because the dollar was so weak. Otherwise, it would not have happened. Remember, euro at one point was, I mean, the floating exchange rate goes up and down. You can't depend on that. But the structural defect should have been considered when there was no chaos.
But issuing euro bonds was something that wouldn't necessitate deeper political union at this stage, is it?
Well, I mean, it effectively creates a sort of debt pool, a debt union, which is almost certainly unconstitutional in Germany, and there's no treaty authority behind it. So you'd have to sort of put this to referenda. You'd have to do all kinds of things. You can't just sort of do it with a flick of the fingers. This is the problem. I mean, these are major political changes, and national leaders don't have the authority to do it. And I totally agree with Ali that they should have thought of this when they signed the Maastricht Treaty. And in fact, I wrote a leader for the Daily Telegraph the day afterwards saying exactly that. I think a lot of people knew that it was unworkable as constructed, and at some point they would have to create a fiscal union to back it up. They didn't use the 15, 20 years that have passed to do that, and now we're in this crisis. And I might also add, although the euro worked in a sense, the divergences between North and South that basically fundamentally caused this crisis were building up every year. And there were people in the European Central Bank and the European Commission flagging this up. You go back and read reports from the Commission 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they were very, very worried about the gap developing between, Italy, Spain and Germany, and that it would lead to a crisis. They were warning it then. Nobody did much about it. That's the problem.
Thomas Clough, why are the Germans so against Eurobonds?
Obviously because they benefit from, if you like, their good post-war track record in terms of keeping their public finances in order. So the German state's financing or refinancing costs are substantially lower, amongst the lowest in the Eurozone, the lowest in the EU. And the worry is that if one does move to Eurobonds for all or even part of the cumulative debt of the public debt of Eurozone member states, then German refinancing costs would rise. That's one worry. The other worry is that the pressure on the more profligate countries, the big spenders, to get their act together, as it were, would decrease. So two negative effects. And then there is a third issue, and that echoes what Ambrose and Ali have just said. Eurobonds are a major economic but also political step, because creating a common debt pool in fact, immediately raises the question of how to legitimize that decision in, if you like, democratic or parliamentary terms. But also once it's been created, once this union of debt, this debt union has been established, how to enshrine it, how to anchor it in the democratic and parliamentary lives of Eurozone member states, but also of, if you like, the European institutions. And the ECB's former chief economist, Ottmar Issing, one of the thinkers, early thinkers about the Union, one of the co-architects of the Maastricht Treaty, has published a very interesting op-ed in the FT this week, where he said, last week, where he said essentially Eurobonds means a European treasury, means in effect a European, or must mean a European government controlled by European Parliament. That's the leap. That's the leap into a United States of Europe or a United States of the Eurozone. The interesting thing is that not so very long ago, the British Chancellor George Osborne called on the Eurozone to do precisely that, in effect, which means that the UK has broken with its 10-year policy of stopping the Eurozone for developing a much stronger own, if you like, quasi-federal or federal identity.
Ali.
Yeah, but he also added that UK will not join it without hesitation. But may I just disagree with one aspect of what you just said? Having a Eurozone bond, and I emphasize Eurozone bond because we already have Euro bonds, will make it necessary for any country that wants to borrow to go through some authority, some central place, because the countries will not be able to, if I understand it correctly, issue their own. It would be issued by one central authority. And that perhaps would be the best indirect way to control some of these peripheral countries.
We're going to have to leave it there.
Yeah, I mean,
just very quickly.
The trouble is you have a kind of EU treasury there. Who's going to be in charge of it, and to what parliament and legitimate authority are they going to answer? The English Civil War was fought over, who controls the budget, who controls taxes and spending. And there have been civil wars in several other countries in Europe over exactly that issue. These are major matters. You can't just hand it over.
All right, we're going to
end
on that note. We'll get a response from Ali on that just after this short break. When we come back, we'll have the rest of the international news for you and the rest of tonight's debate. Don't go away.